bus. That's what I'm talking about. Why you gotta be, man, they trying to turn everybody gay. You know what I'm saying, bro?
Nah, brother, I really don't know what you're talking about.
I'm saying, you see the bus, you see how they got the two dudes kissing on the joint. It's like commercials. Everywhere you go, everything gay. Youngers walking around these little the baggy fit jeans and everything. You know what I'm saying?
Well, brother, do you have hate in your heart?
What?
Yeah, that's not the Christianly thing to do. You should love our neighbors.
Man, I ain't loving no gay neighbors, Joe. It ain't say you gotta love your gay neighbors. It don't say love your neighbors. It don't say... I ain't talking about neighbors. I'm talking about faggots. So you say you love faggots?
What I'm saying is, love is the most powerful force in the universe. And Jesus came to show us how we should love our brothers.
Man, you sounding real gay right now. Talking about loving some brothers. Hold on, Joe. Look, nah, look, if you want to tell me something, just let me know. I might be preaching to the choir. Man, I'm saying, the faggots, you talking about loving. You know what, man? Forget this, man. I'm going to walk in peace. Brothers and sisters, sometimes your arms is not long enough to box with Spooky in the sky. Spend your time where it's most useful. This is the after service announcement. On the horizon. We'll see you on the battlefield. On the horizon. You gotta love it.
The assault against African-centeredness is increasing in size and magnitude. There's a lot of fear in our community. There's a lot of need to be validated and loved by enemies in our community. There's a lot of need to run from who you are because it is something that you despise. Self-hatred and mentricide are deep, and it seems like they're going deeper. But what I see in front of me tells me that it's not victorious. And there's one person sitting here, and that means that we haven't lost. We have a lot of work to do, and we need to focus our attention on our children, because they're the ones who are the primary targets. But on this issue, and every other issue of insanity, it turns us into somebody who we are not. If we're going to win, we have to produce warriors.
Initiated, student of the Ewok, so baptized by the warrior teachers. I'm training, learning how to shoot the gauge while you earn the safe playing video games. This message here's for the RPG brigade. Shed blood, bring peace, that's the warrior's way. Live Nation is the blood, sweat, and tears. Ibaye, Ashe, I'm bringing death to the quiz. I wanna live, so I die for the kids. Back smack gangsters coming home from bids. Free your dome, you only hard to kill your own. A straight race traitor, the white man's clone. Marina man, I'ma continue to plan. Choke the life out of a cracker with my bare hands. That's my word, my deed, and my thought. From sun up to sundown, true warriors fought.
This needs to be emulated everywhere we are at. Those people who are calling themselves warriors, well, the root word of warrior is war. And either you're playing games and trying to be a fake thug, or you really are about the business of protecting your community because you realize that we are at war. And you act like we are at war, not like we are at peace.
Firm handshake, look a brother in the eye so I can tell if he fake. I can see through the disguise if he got a forked tongue, speaking disrespectful lies. I sought to Baba Baruchi, respect him cause he wise. Dropping wisdom on the pages, so stand up and be courageous. Our enemies engaging with grenades and shotty gauges, with machetes, with the razors, with the stick or with the stone, or bare knuckles to their faces. Got a hatred for the races, other times are for the traitors. Won't forget about the lynchings, how they fed us to the gators. Broke gangsters protect their neighbors, won't betray us for some paper. Our secrets keep it sacred, our legacy's the greatest. They the greatest, cause they haters, they some haters. I drop it like an anchor with the hopes that it'll change us. The artificial flavors. You wanna be a player while they hanging, so which team you playing for, the underdog or for the fake?
Warriors are supposed to be about the business of defending those people in their community. They're supposed to be about the business of making people comfortable, giving them a safe space. People say warriors are healers, and they are. Sometimes healing is that tough love thing where you gotta handle people in a particular way. But our job is to make it so that our people have all obstacles removed from their way in being African.
Hotel, a Abibi Fahodier. Welcome to the Abibi Fahodier Show with Mwalimu and Yaa Baruti. Tonight is actually going to be Yaa Baruti's solo. Last month it was Brother Baruti's solo. Not something planned earlier, but sometimes we need to do that. But anyway, actually tonight's topic is Yaa's reading list. And in fact, Baruti and I had planned to do this topic jointly, I think May of last year, and I was out of town, so I didn't. He talked about his reading list. I didn't get to do that, so I'm actually doing that tonight. Now, hopefully I'll be mentioning names of books that people will want to purchase if they don't already have and add to their libraries. Just want to remind listeners, please and always buy black. You know, sometimes we're forced to purchase books by others, but always, you know, try to find the author. If he or she actually sells their own books, first and foremost, support the author. But if not the author, him or herself, do support black businesses. But wanted to make some general comments about reading. Thankfully, we have a lot of serious readers among us. You know, that helps us to be conscious and knowledgeable about our plight, our story, how we got here, all of those things. But as we look for books to read, I have some general pointers I'd like to suggest that when you're looking for books on a particular topic, definitely ask people that you know personally and whose opinion that you trust, because you know their values are African-centered, and you can trust that they would, you know, recommend good books, because oftentimes things appear good, they sound good on the book jacket, and we can waste money and find out, you know, there is an agenda contrary to who we are. Also want to remind everybody we should always think critically, and, you know, that's at all times. That's 24/7. And, of course, even when we wake up from our dreams, we need to analyze those as well, because, you know, those are messages to us. But regardless of the author, and even when it's an author that you know and someone who you honor as being African-centered and, you know, you appreciate their previous works, but always read critically. We should never, you know, read a book and just because this is someone we respect, just automatically agree with everything that we read. Definitely for those people that we have some knowledge of their previous work and what they're doing and their values, and we respect. Hopefully the vast majority of what they have written will be something that you would agree with or you could embrace, but don't automatically do that regardless of who it is, because nobody knows everything, and a lot of what people write about, of course, will reflect their values, but even when we are embracing African values, our political thinking doesn't disappear. Our religious or spiritual beliefs will find their way in what we write. Or for those of us who don't embrace religious or spiritual thinking. But also, you know, and if it's fiction, and depending on what it is, people's sexual values find their way in their works, especially in fiction. So we need to always be very mindful when we're reading, never simply just soaking information in. Want to remind people that, writing, it's about, when it's fiction, people are using their imaginations. Of course, with historical fiction, we also, alluding to, or I should say, our historical things that have actually happened in our story, but it's also people using their imaginations. So, with that, keep that in mind, as well as when you read in nonfiction, writing is people's interpretation. Now, a work can be filled with facts that we would all generally agree on, certain dates, certain things happened, but then it becomes an interpretation of what was going on behind the scenes or how we need to look at things. Another thing I want to say that I often say to people I get to talk to, we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I say that in reference to sometimes some of our writers have written wonderful books, and later in their lives, they start embracing whites to a degree, or we later find out there's a sexual perversion going on there, something they embrace. However, so clearly we're not going to embrace individuals who embrace our enemies or the sexual behavior of our enemies. However, if they have written good books that can help us to learn about our story and culture, that can help us in our quest for a sovereign African nation, let's not discard those books. Let us remember what we should do at all times anyway. We should never put anyone on a pedestal. People are people, and especially in this society, even as we embrace the African way, that's a journey. That's a lifelong process. So whatever menticide we developed prior to learning that we were African and prior to making a commitment to follow the African way, when we become African, our menticide doesn't immediately disappear. Aspects of it, because even making that choice, you're learning, and again, it's a journey. But do know that's a lifelong journey, and people can unconsciously pass on. Well, if you're in a position where you get to speak or write and people get to hear you, you're in that position, and you don't necessarily have 100% clarity. So, and then there are some people who embrace some things African and they call themselves African-centered. There may be things that they know are not African, but they refuse to let them go, or they see some value in it and they don't see that it's anti-African. So either consciously or unconsciously, people's thinking, will be found in their writing, because that's what your writing is, what you think, what you believe. So, again, if there is good work, embrace the good work, and, leave out all things anti-African. But, of course, if you have choices, and, say, two people have written books on African spirituality, and they're very similar, that one isn't necessarily providing a lot more insight than the other, then definitely go with the one whose values are more in keeping with yours. Okay, and a piece of advice Brother Baruti always says, you can find good books filled with lots of good information, but always pay close attention to what are the conclusions of the book. So, and sometimes if the conclusions end up being, we need to all get along, or it's somehow not about African sovereignty, then skip the conclusion and keep the information and use your own conclusions, having used your African logic and coming up with your own conclusions. So there's good material out there. And the book itself may have some issues, and even the books I'll be recommending today, whenever I know of information that speaks to there's some possible menticide or some issue with the author, I'll mention that, while at the same time, of course, but this is why I recommend the book, and I think it's helpful to do that. And I know we allow students to read books that we're not 100% thrilled with the author, but if it's something, the book is good or it has good information that can help the student, we let the student read the book, but before he or she reads that book, we point out this is the issue with the individual, because, definitely in our community, we can easily, get into hero worship if we like an author and we put people on pedestals. And of course, we should never do that. If someone is, as far as we know, they're representing their positive role models, and we should see them as such. But we should never put anyone on a pedestal, because when you do that, you set them up for failure, because we were intended to be on the earth. We're supposed to stay grounded. So you put that person in a precarious position, but also you put yourself in harm's way of being let down. And then you're angry at the individual for not being perfect. But if you don't put them there, if you honor the work that has been done, then, of course, you'll be disappointed, heartbroken, even angry, but it's not the same thing as when you've put someone on a pedestal. And then at that point, you want to throw away everything. But again, hold on to things of value. And definitely in our situation, we're really not in a position. Well, on the one hand, yes, we have lots of good information coming from lots of different places. So if, you just can't stomach a particular person because of an issue he or she has, hopefully you can get, the information elsewhere. But, it's not going to be the end all in the beginning or end of it all. But, again, we are in a position, valuable information we shouldn't just quickly throw away. Okay, now before I talk about some of the books that I actually recommend, would like to say some things that I wouldn't recommend. And one of them is romance novels, which I don't read them. I don't think can't recall reading one, but I've definitely been told that, I guess probably maybe since the 90s, they have become soft porn. This is by black writers as well. So just a warning there. But also want to say that something, and these are not books, but definitely we talk about reading. We often read magazines, and I remember subscribing to Essence magazine in the 80s, because of course, the magazine for black women, and actually I'm of course, finding the African way is a journey. So this is very early in my journey, but I quickly started recognizing and not appreciating what I was reading in Essence. And, this is going to be true of Jet and Ebony as well, that we're pushing, there's an agenda being pushed. So, and the agenda is that interracialism. So, articles encouraging the sisters, date outside the race, but also in terms of the sexual articles on sexuality, or people writing in with their problems, pushing of sexual perversion as normal sexual behavior. But then that's because these are mainstream magazines. So you have the people who run these magazines they accept American culture. So things that in the past they wouldn't have accepted, that's acceptable. So, in black publications today, homosexuality is going to be accepted. And in fact, I recently, last year, because of some reward points that could be redeemed with magazines, I actually got, free subscriptions, because there is some good information in the magazines. But in doing that, it also provided some research for me, some things to critique, because I'm working on a book on African womanhood. But I got to see, in Jet magazine, they're now showing same-sex couples being married in the pictures of, married couples. And even in the articles, whenever they're talking about, so I actually ended up with a free subscription to Jet, Ebony, and Essence. And in all of them, you saw same-sex couples, and they were being presented as, this is just an alternative. They weren't presented as an alternative. They were just presented as couples like everybody else, as if the question of it, is no longer a question. It's, they're just couples like everybody else. So while, I want to caution us to be mindful about the books we read, but don't forget about the magazines as well. And even if you do read the magazines for other information, be clear that, and be mindful of your children reading them. And that was something that really was, I was concerned about. And when I stopped subscribing, I didn't want to pay money, because I was very clear that the young women in college, and definitely younger as well, who read those magazines, especially Essence or any of those magazines, they are considered, if it's in those magazines, young people accept that as this is true, and they look to those magazines for the information. And I didn't want to help to financially support publications that were helping to issue in the decline of African people. And unfortunately, that's still continuing. So not only we have to be mindful of what we read, but also we need to be mindful of even more so, what we allow our children to read. Because some of us, we get to a point, we have clarity. So, and we're older, wiser, more mature, it can be easier for us to filter things for ourselves. But our children, of course, definitely can't do that. And one last thing before I actually start going over making suggestions, please, whenever you read something, share it. And it's something good, do share it with your friends. And if it's something good, but it has issues, and when I say share, I mean, recommend it to others, because Nana Marcus Garvey told us, never lend a book you want, because you never get it back. But, do recommend it, or if you can afford it and you want to make sure people read certain books, I would say buy one for yourself that you don't lend out, and buy a second one that you lend out, so that hopefully you'll get it back and you'll be able to lend it to someone else. But do point out issues with the book as well, because, you know, depending on who you're recommending it to, because based on your word, they may see it as, you know, okay, this is gospel, which they shouldn't do, but some people do, or they think whatever is in that book you wouldn't have recommended if you didn't, you know, weren't accepting of it. And we know sometimes good books, things that we should read, will have something in there that, you know, goes against our values. And, you know, those things just need to be pointed out. And in fact, that's what, in terms of some of my recommendations, I want to do. Now, actually, I've made a list of books that I thought are good books, and I categorized them. So I'm actually just going to do my categories in order. And African culture is one of my categories. And so definitely let me say, these are just some books that stand out to me or I personally like, you know, and a lot of the classic books are not on my list because those are the books people often read about, hear about, and have read them. And a lot of them, unfortunately, I haven't read them myself. Having been an English teacher, I've spent a lot of time, since 91, I'm spending a lot of time reading student papers, and since Bruce's been writing, editing his books. But anyway, a lot of books on my to-read list I haven't read, but so hopefully these won't be many of the classics that definitely, you know, you should read, but these are books that I've read and I like them for whatever reason. So African culture, there's a book called The Sankofa Movement by the Okotos, husband-wife team. They have the Nation House School in D.C., and they've been a part of independent CB, the Council of Independent Black Schools, but African-centered education. And, you know, implicit in a lot of these books, I didn't take the time to write down their subtitles, but it's about re-Africanization. We know the Sankofa symbol. Go back and fetch it. And I like the book. I'm also recommending books that it's been years since I read them, and of course I didn't have the time to go back and highlight what I like, but what I like in general will be what you're hearing. It's about re-Africanization, and from every, you know, aspect of our lives. So it's definitely a good book for people on the path who recognize that they're African and who want to return to the African way. So it's a very good book called The Sankofa Movement, and the author's last name, Akoto, Akoto. Another book, a very little book, a monograph that we actually sell, and we do so. And actually, the author of that book has also been a part of the African-centered education movement for over 30 years, like the Okotos. He's also a member of the Council of their school. Has a African-centered school, and he's in Missouri. The Okotos are in D.C. But his book is called The African Personality, Lubrication for Liberation. It has a further subtitle, but that's a short title. And that's Baba Senyinka and Weezie. But it's a book on conflict management, and basically I think the subtitle, Can Black People Get Along? Something similar, or African people, can we get along? And we all know the major difficulty we have, whether it's with our marriages, relationships, you know, those type relationships, or families, friends, or organizations, it is hard to sustain our relationships, because when conflict arises, which it will naturally do, we find it difficult to resolve those conflicts. And so again, this is a short book with practical guidelines as to what to do when a conflict arises. So definitely very good book. I think every African should have a copy of that or something similar to that in helping us to deal with our conflict, because otherwise we continue to form relationships, but we need to be able to sustain it. So how can we build a sovereign African nation if we can't keep our relationships together? Okay. Another book that I really like is, and it's also a little bit book in itself, but it contains a number of essays, and all the essays are relatively short, but the book is entitled To Be African, and it has a long subtitle, which I don't remember offhand, and I didn't write it down, but you would be able to find it if you can find it. The main title is To Be African, and it's edited by Mama Marimba Ani, Baba Obadeli Williams, and there's a third editor, but it is a collection of essays about the thing to be African. So some of them, so Mama Marimba, remember, has an essay in there titled To Be an African Woman, so which I always recommend whenever I get to talk about African women. Nana Asa Hilliard, Nana Hannibal Afrique, Nana Wade Nobles. Some of the major scholars that whose names you may know, but excellent collection of essays dealing with the topic of to be African, what it means to be African. Now, as we used to sell them, and Mama Marimba, who sells them, is currently out. I know they will be. She hopes to get additional copies, and definitely on our program we'll let people know when there are more copies available. However, just talked to a Baba in February who sells books, and at that time, this was early February, he had some copies. So if someone wants a copy, you could email me, and I'll forward that email to him. And my email address is my name, Yaabaruti, YAABARUTI @yahoo.com, or you could email would be better because I can email him. Just forward your email to him. There is also a book, and I hadn't thought about it in a while because it's a little book and it's put away on a shelf. Haven't seen it in a bookstore, but it's a book, and of course today you can find practically anything online. It's called 72 Concepts to Liberate the African Mind, and the authors Uhuru Hotep and Taliba Hotep. But excellent little book, and it's at 72 Concepts. So African terms, it's as far as I know, it's kind of like African-centered dictionary of concepts. So very good. Definitely would recommend that. Have some autobiographies on my list. The latest autobiography I read is called An Examined Life, and it's written by Mama Anna Swanston, who was Nana John Henrik Clark's secretary. Her life story, she's not famous other than, like she's known as his secretary, and she wrote a book on Nana Clark. But her life is very interesting, and a scene that stands out to me is when her mother's mother, they're living in Louisiana, and it's still the practice that white males could just send for black females, teenage girls, and the practice was, it was something that you had to do, but her maternal grandmother refused to do so when her daughter was called for by Euro, and she sent her daughter away from Louisiana to save her. But when she's about to be punished by the white male who she refused, she kills him. White mother, we know stories of our daughters being raped by Euros, but here's a true life story of the kinds of things, a black mother will do to protect our children. But that's just one part of the story that stands out to me. But, reading the story of strong black women, so that's definitely a book. And that's something we will be, just haven't gotten around to it, asking her, can we help her sell those books, her autobiography, because it's an excellent book, and definitely it should get out. A lot of people know, of course, about Frederick Douglass's narrative of his life. Now, would like to, and what you tell the students, Frederick Douglass married a European. His first wife was black, so I take issue with that. However, his narrative and, the so-called slave narratives that we're telling our students, and we're trying not use that word slave in reference to our ancestors, the narratives of enslaved Africans are definitely good reading for adults and our children, for us to be knowledgeable what our ancestors endured. And incidents in the life of the slave girl. So, again, a narrative which deals with, from a female perspective of what she had to endure, and that's Harriet Jacobs. Both of these, famous books, easy to find. Iyanla Vanzant, and so I definitely have a disclaimer with her. I used to love her work, and so the books, again, I didn't throw her books out, the books that I like, because of her transformation, because I think when I read her first book, she was a Yoruba priestess, and over time, she became, or I don't know if she became Christian or she has incorporated a lot of Christianity into her books. And from my perspective, for one thing, and changes that I saw in her perhaps are about audience, because initially she talked about her books would be subtitled for black women. Okay, and that didn't stick around because, when you want to write for everybody, and even one of her books, she's given relationship advice, and she just mentions a homosexual couple, and as if, that's just a couple. So, but, I saw her changing. But nonetheless, her autobiography is a story of a black woman surviving. I wonder how in the world that she survived. But the book is called Interior. So, it speaks to what we can survive, the strength of a black woman, and it's subtitled A Black Woman's Healing in Progress. Okay. Now, actually noted some children's books. As a teacher, and we deal with children, and so I know that's an issue. People often ask us about, to make recommendations. But before I recommend anything, and any books that I'm recommending tonight, many of them I read years ago, and so my African understanding has become clearer, and I don't remember every single detail, and I didn't stop and, this is something bad, let me tell. So this, if I'm recommending, this is something that in general I see it as being helpful or positive. But I recommend that for our children's books especially, you read it first. And I know as a mother of only one child, that was extremely difficult to do. In case, and I cannot say, unfortunately, that I read every single book before she did, but what I did do was to, as she got older and she was a voracious reader, it was hard to, keep up with books, but had friends with children of her age, and people who are African-centered, so I could ask my friends for recommendations. So do that and get personal recommendations, not because it's received a Coretta Scott Award. Okay, it's very possible with her awards, definitely it could push interracialism, integration, because that was part of her agenda. And she also promoted rights, homosexual rights. So look for personal recommendations. And also want to say to parents, I hate it when I see black children reading Harry Potter and Twilight. And just FYI, do we know that the vampire stuff, that's a promotion of that's sexual perversion as well? Okay. We're allowing our children to read, and some of us are just happy because the child is reading, but I'd rather my child not read than to read something that's going to pervert their thinking. But we have children who are voracious readers, and they need long books to read because they zoom through it. But instead of Harry Potter, why not Roots? And in fact, definitely I would recommend Roots. Now, again, I read that in the 70s, a long time ago. So I can't tell you, can't give you warnings about particular things in the story, but that's a story that our children should read. And I did have one student who was a voracious reader, and she was mature enough and had some clarity. She read it here, and I asked her to point out anything, and she wasn't able to point out, any major problems. However, again, it would be great, even if your child is having to do a summary per chapter, and if we're teaching our children how to read critically, things to look out for, the promotion of interracial integration, any sexual perversion, which the sexual pervert, that probably is not in there. But of course, there is an interracial, at least, I don't remember the book, but from watching the miniseries, those good white characters are in there. But those are things we need to explain to them anyway. And also, having the child read the book and watch the miniseries, which of course is available on DVD, would be good. But you're able to point things out. Definitely, we looking for books for our children. Do look in some books they have the author's picture. So if it's a European, when our daughter buying books for her or checking books out, that was immediately dropped. So even if it was a decent story, not trying to promote their perspective in any way. But keep in mind, the author, we said before, they're going to write things that push their values. For young children, and some of these are from me remembering my daughter as a little girl, but I know the books are still around, and unfortunately, I need to go to my daughter. I gave her all of her books when she had a daughter, and so they're good books that you could probably still find that might not just be readily available at your bookstore. But of course, and I think everybody knows, support black bookstores, and that's where you're going to find black books. But also going to libraries and black neighborhoods, you will find more books that cater to us. Jumbo means hello. So I think, and the other one is on numbers, but, teaching our children that they're using those books, those two young children's books are about teaching Kiswahili. Africa is not a country. And in recent years, we found a book called Nzinga that's dealing with Queen Nzinga, and that's by Patricia McKissick, who I recommend generally, in terms of children's books. Van Zandt, actually, Iyanla Van Zandt has a book for young girls called Don't Give It Away. Definitely recommend Brother Baruti's chess primer for our young people learning chess. But that's also, it's not for children only. It's for anyone wanting to learn to play chess. Recommend Sharon Flake books. They're good books for preteens, teens, about promoting positive self-esteem for our daughters. She also has a book called Bang, which is kind of like a rites of passage book for boys, but with that book, I read it, it was too much violence. So I haven't let any of our students, maybe one, but, it has to be someone of a certain maturity, and anybody who's leaning toward or too excited by violence, I wouldn't recommend it. But I think more the book for girls. But, the fact that it was a good rites of passage story, Bang, I would recommend that. Virginia Hamilton, I recommend her generally, and she has a collection of books called The People Could Fly. Our folk tales, our stories. Recommend Mildred Taylor generally. I recently, because I was teaching it, read Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, which is a very good book. I recommend Walter Dean Myers generally, and again, doesn't mean that I've read each of those books. I just know they have a reputation of, good things for our children. And he writes more for he writes for boys. There's a book called Malcolm X for young readers. And, I recommend any pro-Malcolm books. However, I definitely want to caution people when our children are reading, and how Malcolm is loved, and I definitely love him dearly. But we should be mindful, because I think a lot of people may have converted to Islam or joined the Nation of Islam strictly because they love Malcolm so dearly, versus, joining that group and, becoming Muslim, Islamic Muslim, if that's something that's well thought out that you want to do. But I think we have to be mindful when our children, that's even adults, that we fall in love with someone and we just want to be like that person. Okay, a good book, Finding Fish by Antoine Fisher. And definitely want to point out books and movies are so very different. I recommend the book there, and it is not this love story that they have in the movie, but again, they're two different things. But I recommend this book, especially for our teenagers who feel that life has treated them harshly. Reading this story of how this young, he's now, an adult, but how his life story as a child, what he experienced, will help our children to be more grateful. And I know we've had particular students, especially to read this, who weren't thankful for their blessings. They were focusing on, their problems, and their problems didn't compare to this story. There's a children's biography called Malcolm X by Mark Davies, a Marcus Garvey biography by Mary Lawler. Okay. And there's a book, I don't even have a copy of it. I've seen copies of it by Ayikwe Armour, who wrote 2,000 Seasons, but it's about teaching hieroglyphics. I think it's called To Babies, teaching hieroglyphics to babies. It's something like that, but it's babies or children. And definitely, the idea of teaching our children African languages as soon as possible is, definitely something we want to do. But of course, then that means to really ensure that we need to learn African languages so that we can start speaking those languages in utero to our babies, so that one of the first languages that they hear, or when we speak to them directly, try to do that in African languages. And of course, Aesop's fables, definitely, and we should know that Aesop was an African. He may have lived in Greece, in the same way we're African just because we live here. But, fables are wonderful with teaching morals and lessons, and definitely we need to continue to do that for our children. Okay, my fiction category. I believe my favorite novel is 2,000 Seasons by Yikwe Arma. And that's something we have let some of our older teenage students read. One of them is reading it right now. But I tell them before reading it, and even an adult, because, when there are depictions of what happened to us, sometimes it can be very gross, because it was gross what happened to us. But there are sexual perversions depicted in that book, and definitely would not want, our young people reading that definitely would want the parent to read that. And that's the section that's dealing with what the Arabs did to us. And the reason I like that book, the reason it's one of my favorite books, is that it's like our historical look at Africa. So we have Africa before others came to enslave us and oppress us, but also it looks at what our weaknesses that existed before others came, and because of our weaknesses, it allowed others to come and do what they did. But the wonderful thing is the ending of the book, that it ends on a note of hope that this is not the end. Our oppression is not the end of our story. Another book, and I'm recommending this for adults, but we have our students reading it as well. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, which is a classic. And also like to recommend any book that Europeans promote, and they do, and they sell it because they can make money, and that could be, on the one hand, it's about, they see it as something to make money, but also having taught Things Fall Apart on the college level in the Norton Anthology, I see they have a different interpretation of the protagonist, Okonkwo. For them, this too is a story of African life before Europeans came, and unlike 2,000 Seasons, it deals with Arabs and Europeans coming, the destruction that was brought. But this just deals with, it's set in Nigeria, and Achebe's Nigeria, and it deals with life before Euros and the destruction, and literally things fall apart when the Euros come in. And it shows the evil and insidious way that they were able to come in. They just didn't come in and kill people and take over. They did it in a more insidious way, which for me, it scared me reading it for the first time to see how a society, not perfect, but how, basically I know the history. Okay, they came in, they did this, but reading the book was like, if you're able to imagine seeing, oh, this is what they did. So that's definitely a book that I recommend. But the Euro I can see why they promote it. They see the death of Okonkwo, the protagonist, as a shortcoming on his part. I see it as a triumph, because it's the thinking, I'll be before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave mentality. Okay. All right. As I watch the clock, do I want to mention? Okay. Parable of the Soul by Octavia Butler. She's science fiction writer. Now, there are some things in that book. I think there's an interracial relationship. Again, so she's not African-centered. She wasn't. She's an ancestor now. But I like that. I recommend that book, and we've had students to read it because it deals with if everything went insane, if you had chaos in America, because that's the setting, you have a black female surviving under, the horrendous circumstances, and that's very well could be something that we have to do beyond the craziness that we live in of just actually physically having to flee and survive. It allows some of that thinking. Jubilee by Margaret Walker. Again, haven't read that since college, but it's a female protagonist dealing with the issue of our enslavement. Toni Morrison. Now, have to give a disclaimer. She has won a Pulitzer Prize for literature, for fiction, a Nobel Prize for literature. She's an editor at Random House. She teaches at Princeton. So in those ways, she is mainstream. However, I learned a lot from her novels, and again, it's been years since I read them. But the general themes of, you can find Africanisms in her novels. She's an excellent writer. But I guess, I'm still trying to figure out why because she's not the only excellent writer. But, they give awards too, and they select whom they please. So, yes, she's an excellent writer. But again, keep that in mind, who she is. And the fact that in her books, she points out the major issues of African people, and that's probably the perspective that they are comfortable with. But Beloved, not the movie, but the book. The Bluest Eye, is often taught in high school, but I will say with that book, unfortunately, and I will also say about Toni Morrison in terms of letting our children read her, generally, there are going to be sex scenes in her books. So, I would say read it first before letting your children read it. Song of Solomon. So, again, these have some positive major themes, but, keep that in mind. She's, lauded by white America. So, okay, A Raisin in the Sun, a play. Actually, I think, not that I've read a lot of recent plays, but I love this play because of the themes, and it's just amazing to me, written in the 50s, that many of these themes are still so prevalent, are issues that we have as African people are still alive and well. But have to disclaimer on her, she married a European, and the conclusion of A Raisin in the Sun, and again, Raisin in the Sun, the book, not the P. Diddy movie version of it. But now, actually, because it is a play, when you have good actors, Danny Glover did it, Sidney Poitier, you can find older versions to watch. I definitely would recommend that. But the conclusion of the book is the family moves into a white neighborhood. So that's integration. So I don't recommend it for that. But in terms of the issues of blacks that are brought up, I do. Now, health books, and I'm sure everybody's heard of Layla Africa's African Holistic Health and Nutricide. And for anybody who hasn't, definitely you want those in your library, as well as Queen Afua's Heal Thyself. But a disclaimer there, love Queen Afua, but she has soy, and I think this book was written before she knew and before it's becoming generally known that soy is bad for us. So her recipes and where she's mentioning soy, you want to omit. But the fasting and other general things about health, it's a good book. Also, a book that we sell, authored by a friend of ours, but we don't sell it because he's a friend. We're selling it because it is a good book. It's called The Rule Book. Don't have the subtitle in front of me, but it's on our website. It's written by Dr. Nana Kwaku Opare, and basically it's like an instruction manual. These are major things you should know about having good health. So I would recommend that. Now, books on African spirituality. Karenga has translated Odu Ifa, which is the Yoruba sacred text. That was recommended to me. I haven't finished reading it, but, anything that's by us about African people, I would recommend that. And actually, The Spirit of a Man, also by Van Zandt. I think I would recommend that for younger guys, angry guys who say are not necessarily embracing the African way, and it definitely, if they have a Christian background, it will be open to it. But, it's about, we need healing, and it's looking at specifically, at black men. And so even though it's not the ideal book I would want to give to, say, a young black man, but I think for someone who has rejected religion and spirituality, or just needs to tap into that, to assist themselves, I would recommend it. Another book by Van Zandt, and these are older books by her too, before her transformation, or maybe as she's making the transformation, but they, I think they have good points. Tapping the Power Within. Just a general book, say an introduction to African spirituality. And there's actually a book called African Spirituality on Becoming Ancestors, and author Anthony Ephraim Dancor. Okay. Want to recommend some books about traditional Africa, and I have major disclaimers about both authors. First author, Banfu Some, who used to be married to Malidoma Some. They are from Burkina Faso, and their books actually teach us some of the wisdom of traditional Africa. However, the disclaimer with them, and so her two books are The Spirit of Intimacy and Welcoming Spirit Home. So you want to learn something about traditional African culture, and these are short books, so quick to read, but very informative. But in the last chapter of The Spirit of Intimacy, there's the chapter is called Gatekeepers, and a suggestion that certain members of the community who lived outside of the community, and it's insinuating that they were homosexual. And we know, those of us who, I have not traveled there, but from the reading on our traditional culture, not by the new people who are trying to put homosexuality into Africa, that this is not a part of our traditions. Now, so Bonfu comes here with her husband, Malidoma, who is financed by a white Christian men's group. So, I think they're Christian, but it's a white men's group, probably Christian. But, and they're always open to learning things that will assist them. So the information in the books are good. Of Water and Spirit is actually his autobiography. That's an excellent book on a young man and doing rights and the problems that he encountered because he was taken to this Jesuit school, which there was homosexuality. The boys were being molested there. So it's interesting. He has come out to be a proponent of homosexuality. But again, that's what we have to be independent, because when we work for other people, our thinking can be changed. But his books, his autobiography is wonderful. The Healing Wisdom of Africa, another book, Ritual Power, Healing and Community. Now, I don't know if he has anything more recent, but those books, general discussions of our culture. And I think whenever we think, okay, if it's somebody from Africa, we can just read blindly and accept everything that's written, which is not true. Again, accept that which makes sense for us. If somebody's pushing other agendas along with, accept the good, ignore the bad. But along with traditional Africa, definitely want to recommend books on African proverbs. And the one that we use at Ankaben to give our students, one of the ones, and the one that I'm recommending, I like it because the proverbs are categorized by topic. So whatever issue we have with students, if it's lying, being lazy, whatever, I can quickly find a proverb that speaks to it. And it's called The Wit and Wisdom of Africa by Patrick Ebekwe. And lastly, and not least, because I will leave some time for questions, is some of my recommendations on women's books. Now, I want to start off who I would suggest that you not read. Alice Walker, someone who was promoted as, she's one of the most famous black women writers, but she's a feminist. Okay, and feminism is European, and it is something, when we follow that, it has helped to divorce us from black men, and it's helped to build that rift. And this is something, this is somebody else's philosophy that we've embraced. And so, she's, as a feminist, she participates in whatever sexual perversion. Audre Lorde, her books, she was a lesbian. So in these black feminists, be mindful of who you read. Now, but some who I would recommend, Holistic Parenting. It's a book by Ena Yaa. The author has by now probably has sold out. I know we contacted her last year wanting to sell them on consignment, and she said she had very few, and she was about to sell out. So if you can find it, do keep it. Do get a copy. It's on, from conception through having a baby and the issues of, having a baby at home, all things African about that process. Excellent book. Oh, someone else I wanted to caution black women about, Sister Soldier. Now, I read a collection of her essays, don't remember, didn't have time to go look it up. But I've also read her book, The Coldest Winter Ever, and it seems to me that there's in The Coldest Winter Ever, and it's in one of her essays, seems a promotion of oral sex, which, European sexual perversion. So even though she has made some good political statements, we need to be aware of it. And definitely her book is, filled with sex. I know some people recommend it for teenage girls, and we had one student who was on the wrong path. We did have her reading it after pointing out, the craziness in it, just trying to scare her about this is what, you want to be a thug. This is what's, out there for you. But I am in the process of reading a book called God's Gift, How to Be a Good Black Woman to a Strong Black Man. Some very good points in this book. A lot of things for black women to think about. And although, on the one hand, it is focused on our relationships, but a lot of good points about just women ourselves. Okay, so that's Angela Freeman is the author. Kudos. African Women in Antiquity, edited by Ivan Van Sertima. We know a lot about our heroes, need to know our sheroes. So that's definitely a book we want to have in our library. A book called Africana Womanism. It is a book that talks about, instead of feminism, it's about womanism, the African version of giving women the values that we have traditionally, what those characteristics are. But also she does a good critique of feminism. And definitely we need all our daughters to read that, because they're going to get it in school. People are going to be pulling them in that direction, and they need to be clear on that. Sacred Woman by Queen Afua. I definitely have not finished that book, but for me, it's a great reference book. Now, definitely, for people who would be interested in going through all of the temples that she talks about, if you look at it, you'll see, but it's an excellent reference book about African women. And Van Zandt, again, even though have issues with her, but these are some of her earlier books, Acts of Faith, Daily Affirmations, which I liked that, Faith in the Valley and The Value in the Valley. And I like those two books because they're dealing with the difficulties, dealing with life's difficulties, and they definitely were helpful to me. But again, there may be, and I read these books are old, years ago now, but they definitely have positive information I think black women could benefit from. And actually, just one book by a white author, which generally we would not recommend, but in terms, I found it helpful in terms of
the assault against
getting an understanding of difficulties in relationships in the West, male-female differences. It's called Men Are From Mars, Women Are Venus. When I first heard of it, I laughed about, joked it off, but someone told me, there was some good information, and there is, in pointing out differences, not in terms of the wimpy suggestions of how to deal with those differences, but recognizing that there are differences versus when you're experiencing these differences, you want to get a divorce, because if the differences you're having are based upon a male-female difference, then you get divorced, the same problems re-arise. And those are some of my recommendations. And Sister Shabazz, I want to open up for questions or comments.
Yes, ma'am. And thank you for your kind words. I appreciate that.
Oh, definitely. And thank you for doing the book, because, a lot of information that a lot of us, thankfully, say a percentage of us have been blessed, from we had the old school mothers, or we got it, a lot of our young women, and I'm thinking about my niece, women in their 30s, what used to be, common knowledge, and it's not necessarily there, and we definitely need it. So yes, I'm definitely enjoying, and in fact, this is why I hate reading books, unfortunately, because when I start, I want to put it down. So basically, all of the chapter titles were so interesting, and I would skip around, and the good thing is you have these lists, and I would read the list, and so I haven't read it in its entirety, but I've basically been through it, because it's definitely offering some good information for black women.
Thank you. All right. We'll go on and go to the phone lines. 3455, you're live on War on the Horizon. 3455. Okay, I will assume that they are just listening.
Okay.
Next call, 0281. You're live on War on the Horizon. 0281. All right. 0992. You're live on War on the Horizon.
Good evening, Jumbo. This is Sister Audra calling.
Oh, Jumbo. See, Jumbo, Sister Audra, my daughter.
Jumbo, I was just wanting to say, I never heard you talk like in public. I haven't heard her talk in class as my teacher, but you just did really good. I'm proud of you.
Oh,
and I've read a lot of those books.
Yes, you have. And I hear my baby in the background. But, you know, I think I forgot your father's books. Oh, my.
Yeah,
and I know
you
how I
to
did
say
that.
all of his books.
No, but, yes. Well, and yes, I recommend, I only mentioned chess, but how I forgot, I had his list at the top, and I wanted to start at the bottom, and I forgot to go back to Brother Baruti. So please let me say, everybody, with hearing my grandbaby in the background, of course, the books by Nwalamu Baruti are definitely, I recommend them all. And let me quickly say, the ones especially, Iwa, because it's dealing with character, Kebuka is dealing with what happened to our ancestors during the so-called middle passage from being captured to being on the ship. Complementarity, of course, and we talked about that on this show. It's about our relationships. Revolutionary Daily Thoughts. It's a calendar, a book of quotes for the year with quotes, proverbs, commentary, and a daily affirmation. The book Center is about building African-centered communities. Asafo is on African manhood, message to the warriors. Brother Brody just talked about, you know, it's kind of like a rule book for warriors. The Sex Imperative is talking about the sexual insanity, and it's gotten even much worse since Baba wrote that book. And his book on homosexuality and the effeminization of African men, and that issue gets worse by the day. And that book focuses on African men, but definitely our sisters have gotten on board big time, where you have to do a double take. You can tell it's not a man, but it's a female dressed up like a man, but major issues in our community. So, and that's some of his 18 books, but of course I recommend them all. But thanks for calling, Sister Adjoa, if you're still on.
Yes, I am. That's all I had to say.
But thank you very much, sweetie. I should say Madasipa.
And I said, Maydowo.
Maydowo. Tell my granddaughter I love her.
All right. 3225, you're live on War on the Horizon. 3225. Okay. 7152, you're live on War on the Horizon. 7152. Okay. 7730, you're live on War on the Horizon. 7730.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Greetings, hotel.
Yeah,
Hey.
This is Eric. If y'all can hear me good, my number is 860, but I said 3475. Anyway, can I make a suggestion before I ask my question? Yes. Here's a suggestion for all the listeners, if they're adults or female. And this is what I recommend. I haven't gone through the book myself, but me going through the pages enough, I would say this is a recommendation. I would recommend to all young girls at the age maybe 14 up, and they're like adults now. A good book to reference and look at is The Awakening of the Natural Genius by the Black Children by Ena Yaa. And
Okay, could you repeat that and say it louder? I'm having difficulty. You come in and out for me.
all right, I was holding the book. It's called Awakening the Natural Genius of Black Children by Amos and Wilson.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And the reason why
Anything by Amos Wilson.
there's a lot of books he wrote, but that particular for young women, in regards, none of them deal with children, and they play with it. But this right here will deal with how to get the best. Besides, because we know y'all sisters have it rough because y'all have to work in this type of Western environment. And, we as men at times we have not done enough to really keep y'all in there with so y'all can tend to spend more time with children. So I advise that for women to look at, to read, so we, for the children's sake. Now, my question, I would say, I just tuned in lately. I was really sure the books you read, they're very interesting. But is it only by certain ages you deal with the books that you refer? Because I haven't really gone through most of the books. I remember reading when I was young, but I never took reading that series until later on in life, like this last few years.
Okay, now I didn't understand the last sentence you said.
Oh, my last sentence said, because I never took reading really seriously until for the last 2 years. Now, I asked, but I don't know if you got the first question. I want to repeat it.
Now, did you say my list? And you said you came in later. So no, I did. I had some suggestions for children's books, but most of my suggestions weren't, children's books. Even though a lot of those books, can also and should be read by our teenagers as well. But in terms of, I just categorized them. So some specifically that would be geared to, and I guess most of them on my list were for teen and definitely school-age children, and with maybe the majority of them with younger elementary and middle school, because our high schoolers are definitely capable of reading what we're reading.
Oh, yeah. But, did I
leave Malcolm X off I hope I did not leave off Malcolm X off of my list of autobiographies. If so, I did, and that was a mistake. Of course, the autobiography of Malcolm X.
Oh, yes. I heard about it. I never read it. I did see the book.
Mm-hmm.
I had questions about it because there's certain things that it's still a good book to get, don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You should get it if you're using your critical analysis and thinking.
Yes.
Because you forgot to say, before Malcolm left this earth 48 years ago, is he didn't get a chance to look over the book, man, that was helping compel in that book. So at times when he died, we know a lot of people, higher beings, went in and told him to change some of the things. So at times the book is not really like a whole what Malcolm was expecting because he read through it, because he died before the book was even completed.
Okay, so but also, and you missed the beginning of the show, Brother Eric. I definitely, started the show by saying we have to, given some general suggestions about reading, and we do have to always use our critical thinking skills. So even, and whether, but that's a good point to know as well, that that's the case. But whenever we read something, I think that's, we don't do that enough. We don't use our critical thinking skills. And when we do that and we do the hero worship thing, which we should never do, and that's something I talked about too, and I don't know if you were on by that time. But okay, yeah, take what what's positive that you can use, but don't accept everything that you read, as gospel, or you have to accept, even when it's somebody that you like or you appreciate, and somebody who has a reputation of, being on point, that we always have to think critically.
Yeah, most definitely is always the key, because at times you can be, so a lot of people take things to heart, just like a lot of people take heart the Bible and forgot to say, this is not written by God, it was written by man.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people said that you can't tell people nothing and say, this is written by God, little things, you know what I'm saying? But at times, this is how blackly we don't use our critical thinking.
That's absolutely true. And in fact, that's for people who take exception. And our people have accepted religions, and that's their prerogative. But a critique is when we accept religions and we cannot question, and we don't study, and we take everything as gospel, anything written by man. But that's not to say that, and even when you don't follow a particular religion, that you can't learn something or there isn't something of value in, people's sacred texts. But yes, that's an issue when you can't question, and when you're whatever that religion is or group, whatever, if you're in a position, you have any relationship that you can't question individuals, that's not going to be a healthy relationship for you, because you're dealing with humans, and humans are not perfect, and implicit in that. But, definitely we need to always, and I'm glad you reiterated that, our critical thinking skills.
Well, thank you so much for your call, brother. Was there anything else that you said before we moved on to the next caller?
I think I said everything, because the reason why I brought the critical thing, because after starting to read little things now and I pick up certain things, I know my critical thinking starts to pick much more thoroughly after, catching certain. I mean, it takes a while for every book, but as you read, and you can easily pick out some of the stuff of the literature, and you could make right back what the author is getting at.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brother Eric.
All right.
All right. Okay, just a couple more calls here. 9513, you're live on War on the Horizon. 9513. All right. 6141, you're live on War on the Horizon.
Greetings. This is the Bangalame family calling in from Augusta.
Oh, greetings, my daughter. It's my Joe.
We're listening in, and we're loving all of your suggestions, and it's making me think about during courtship in the beginning of our marriage, reading was really fundamental. We would, me and my spouse would read books together and then discuss them. So, we're taking notes on your suggestions, and we also wanted to say that we're looking forward to your book on African womanhood, and do you know when that's going to be coming up? Because we're looking forward to that.
Oh, I'm looking forward, and I'm trying to speak it in existence, because I'm not like Bob Baruti. He can work it out, trying to get the time to do this. But so, no, and Brother Root just asked me that recently, so I don't have a date, but I am planning for a change to take the summer off, so what I actually need to do is to be able to, I have all these miscellaneous notes, and I think I started taking them in 2003 when my mother transitioned, but it started with, wanting to write a book about my mom, and turned into, I want to do something on African womanhood, and I see my mom as definitely a model of that. But so I have years of all these miscellaneous notes, and maybe what she taught me, my grandmother, and what I see that's wrong, but also some reading along the way. But I need a concentrated period of organizing those, all of this into chapters and doing some more research this summer. So I'm looking forward to the summer, being a major jump start into, making progress. But I tell you, Madasi Pie, I have my children in Augusta, got my daughter in Atlanta, got my children in Augusta listening in. Oh, I'm a blessed mother. So Madasi Pie, guys, for tuning in.
Oh, Miss Madasi Pie.
All right, and that's all of our callers for this evening.
Oh, wonderful. Right on time.
Yes, ma'am.
So, all right, Sister Shabazz, in closing, I would like to invite people to Brother Baruti's next class, which starts next week on his Earth Day. The online class starts Tuesday, and we'll meet each Tuesday in March, 7:30 to 9. And then the class is also held here and it will meet on Wednesday night, starting next Wednesday for the rest of the month of March. And Asafo, his book on, it's subtitled The Warrior's Guide to Manhood. Definitely, and sisters, is not just for the brothers, because this is one of my favorite books. And even though there are sections of the book specifically focused on men, and so, those things will come up. But it's about being a good warrior. So sisters definitely make good warriors as well. But even from the perspective, the parts of the book that deal with manhood in terms of we're mothers to men in training, so we need to help to be able to do our part in training them. Of course, it ultimately will be the men who will, issue them to manhood, but we play a part in that, knowing, and also in choosing righteous brothers to build families with. So we're inviting everybody out to that, and you can, if you want additional information, actually, the class, $10 a class or $30 for all 4 classes. You can Facebook or email Brother Baruti about the classes, and his Facebook page is his name, Mwalimu Baruti, Mwalimu, last name Baruti, or email him, which is his name as well, mwalimubaruti@yahoo.com. People could also, if comments or questions, you could Facebook or email me. My name, Yaa Baruti, Yaabaruti. So that's my Facebook name as well as my email address, yaabaruti@yahoo.com. And as always, want to ask people to do visit our website, and where all of Baruti's 18 books are listed, and some books by others. And I forgot to mention 2000 Seasons. Oh, but we have to reorder some of those. But you are able to find other books on our website as well. But that's www.ankabenhouse.com. And Anka Ben House is spelled AKOBENHOUSE.com. And I want to close by saying Abibi for Hodie, African Liberation.
The assault against African-centeredness is increasing in size and magnitude. There's a lot of fear in our communities. There's a lot